Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Brear, and welcome to episode 25 of the 11FS FinTech Insider Breakfast Show, brought to you this morning by our good friends over at Mitek, who provide tomorrow's identity verification for today's uncertainty we have. In this show, we bring you the best and the brightest from around the fintech and banking landscape every single day, straight into your homes at 8:30 BST. Today, we are thrilled to be joined by Tom. And Tom, I'm going to kill your surname, my friend, but I'm going to give it a go. So, Bloemendaal?
Yes, absolutely. Good morning,
Nailed
David.
it.
First
And
name
you're the
Joe.
uh, and you're the head of strategy over at Mitek. Today, what we're going to be doing is talking about digital identity verification and how the industry is responding to COVID. As always, guys, over on LinkedIn, hit us with any questions, any comments. Throw anything that you've got in there for us, and what we'll do is we'll weave it into the conversation as we go. If you know anybody who should be listening to this right now, then tag them into the comments and get everybody involved in the conversation. Okay, Joe, for anybody who doesn't know, give us the overview. Tell us about Mitek.
Yeah, so Mitek's an identity verification service provider, and we're the only Nasdaq listed company in this space. And my role today is the head of strategy. That means that I usually get sort of involved in strategic deals. So there's a couple of aspects to a blended role that I've naturally sort of progressed into over time. So I help the sales guys sometimes with the more difficult deals. I help the product teams with understanding what the next big thing might be, developing their roadmap, understanding what the market needs, and usually I'm available for marketing as well for speaking opportunities, interviews, things like that.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting. I mean, how is everything happening right now? Obviously, everything that's happening with Corona, how's that affecting you guys at Mitek?
Quite a lot, actually. Lots of it's positive. I mean, we're a small team. I think we're 350, 400 globally, but we're distributed. So we're in several large towns throughout the world. So we were used to connecting and interacting remotely with the teams, but obviously now we miss our local team. So I don't go to, I'm Dutch, so I don't go to our Amsterdam offices anymore these days. So I think what we're doing more and more often is grabbing the phone, trying to find each other and connecting in that way, because we need to keep that good vibe going within the company.
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting, like you say, when you're used to sort of working from home to a certain degree, then actually it feels like a very long Friday working from home for me. But we'll see how I feel in another 2 months, I guess. Thank you to everybody for joining us this morning. Loads and loads of people kind of jumping on LinkedIn, as always. Good morning, Mark. Good morning, Brian. How's it going, Janet? Great to see you again. Morning, Howard. Morning, Yazir. Lucy Heavens. Good morning, Lucy. How's it going? As I said, if there's any questions or comments as we go through, then feel free to drop them into the chat and we'll pick them up as we go through. So I guess for you then, does it seem similar? I mean, like I say, I feel like, you know, when you used to work from home and there was that slight guilt of everybody else who was still in the office, it's like working from home all the time, just without the guilt right now. Everybody's doing it, isn't it? So I guess on a systems level, I mean, how does all of the parts of Mitek kind of work remotely? Because there's one thing, obviously, I guess the service that you're providing for customers, but you know, new opportunities, new conversations with new clients, I guess, is that starting remotely is a slightly different approach, isn't it?
Yes, it is very much. And what's happening now in the IDV, identity verification space, is that there's an increase for interest of this, because as we've sort of gone into lockdown and as everything has to be done from home, obviously our clients have the same problem as you've just described. So they can't find them, they can't onboard their clients, so they need remote ways of verifying identity. So to be honest, they're coming our way. They're coming our way, trying to find us. And then what we need to do is jump on video calls like we're now and see how much we can help them. I mean, if you boil it down, we can connect our clients remotely. We don't have to be in the same room all the time. Although business is done between people, so in normal circumstances, we will travel and go and meet the clients.
Yeah, it's like you say, it's an interesting one, isn't it? Now there is no trundle into a branch ID verification is the critical thing, isn't it, in this sense? So, I mean,
Yeah,
how as that have you seen that switch kind of go off in people's head in
yeah.
terms of actually digital is no longer optional, right?
That's right. That's right. It's gone from a nice to have, something that we would have to convince the more traditional banks to do, to a must have now. There's no other option. Like you say, that you can't come into a branch now and open a bank account. You have to do that remotely. So, I mean, compared to 4 weeks ago, we saw a 50 or 60% rise in Google searches for IDV, remote identity verification. So everybody's looking at deals that were sort of pending, specifically in countries like Spain and Italy at the moment. Now all of a sudden, fast forward straight through the pipeline, because they need the service as quickly as they can get.
Yeah, I mean, it's amazing, isn't it? Like you say, I think the FCA actually came out a couple of weeks ago and said
Yeah,
they're really sort of putting their shoulder behind remote identity verification. I know they've obviously always supported it with a lot of what the fintech players have been doing, but really kind of putting their the rubber stamp on it being really, really acceptable in this instance. Then, I mean, it
yeah,
gives. I wonder how many big banking organizations capability is going to be brought forward 50 years really, in terms of like all of the things that they've been inhibited to do over that type of uh,
yeah,
time
yeah,
period. But
yeah.
a bunch of other people kind of joining in. So Rayo, good morning. We've got Amir over in Pakistan. We've got Bazir joining us from Beijing this morning. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for joining. I guess over this period, then it's sort of leaving a bit of a gap, isn't it, in some instances? Because I mean, there's weird and wonderful ways of attempting fraud in periods like this, isn't there?
Mm.
And I guess those players who have got that more traditional setup are probably a little bit more exposed.
That's true. Yeah, I think the this whole crisis, the pandemic, has sort of elevated a fundamental and structural problem with identity verification. If you really, I mean, we talk about digital identities, but we don't have one. We digitize identities. That's
Mm.
true, and that's the way we then use physical documents in a digital context. But something that is sort of interoperable, completely digital, safe to share, me in control as a consumer. We just don't have that. I know there's some countries in the Nordics that have something similar, but a real solution for this problem doesn't exist yet, and that's now painfully visible, and that does nibble away at trust, right? So
Mm.
if I'm dependent on this all of a sudden, from very simple things like getting my grocery delivered to my mother, or banking, or even worse, if I lose my job and I need to apply for benefits, I need to know that the system around this is safe and trustworthy.
Yeah. Yeah, and like you say, in this day and age, and sadly, all of those use cases are heightened, aren't they, in terms of everything that's really sort of happening? But I mean,
Yeah.
do you see the organisations, I guess, coming out the other side of this tunnel and going, well, that was weird, but let's get back to our paper. Do you see people sort of returning back to the normal that we had before?
I don't think so. I don't think so. They're going to learn very quickly now that there are good solutions like Mitek has to use physical documents and digitize the information on there, and prove that I'm actually uploading my own document with the selfie checks and things like that. And they'll start using that in all sorts of different channels. Some might move a bit slower, and others won't. But I don't think we'll go back to what it is. I think as the society becomes a little bit more fluid, that's going to be a necessity. And it's not the digital world changing so much; it's the physical world, right? That's the
Mm.
one that's changing, and it's going to have to follow what we've been doing in the digital world for a while now. An
Yeah.
interesting one, David, is that we power the gov.verify program. I don't know if you heard of it. That's if you want to be able to access benefits, you need a digital identity. And thinking about your question, how has it affected our company, Mitek? Usually we would have a couple of thousand requests per day, something like that. And then from one day to the next, it was a Monday by chance, it went into the hundreds of thousands, and peaked up at 12, 13 per second at some point. And then you can see what the impact is of not having access, or all of a sudden everybody relying on access, and what that requires from service providers like ourselves.
Yeah. Well, and times like that, like you say, then I mean, if this type of demand was there, I mean, arguably, if we were in a situation where we had this type of pandemic, but actually we're able to go to a branch network, the ability for a teller behind a branch, a stall, being able to service those types of customers it just wouldn't be there. You know,
No,
the sort of throughput on systems like that, and this
no,
is where really, like you say, real web scale scalable systems able to flex to the demand that's there is really, really important. I mean, for me, it's digital identity is such a sort of twining kind of set of things, because to your point, the initial verification is so important to ensure the document that is being put forward is the person with good statistical significance to de-risk the process in terms of what you're doing. But then, as you say, actually it broadens out to businesses in this day and age trying to get access to government funds, or like you say, individuals trying to get access to government funds for distribution of welfare benefits in that sense. So it's such a broad ranging topic, isn't it? I mean, there's lots
yeah,
of different government schemes that have been attempted, I guess, in this sense, isn't there? I mean, digital identity or a national identity in the UK has always been a bit of a dirty word. I'm not really
mm,
sure why. We seem to all hate it for some reason, but nobody can really put their fingers on why. But in this instance, having a national identity scheme that is truly a digital national identity scheme would take so much more complexity out of the process of lending or provision of information, or even as bad things happen, and they will do, i.e. hacks on large organizations, or other elements of cybercrime, being able to create creating the ability to only share the information you want to, as well as retracting that information when you don't want to,
yeah.
would be just such a different place. We'd be in such a different place right now, wouldn't we?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's absolutely true. I went up on stage, I can't remember, a couple of weeks ago, saying if in 2010 somebody would have said you'll still be relying on passwords and passports in digital context in 2020, I would have said, nah, it can't be true. But we do. Um,
Yeah,
and there's nobody to fault. And I think there's a healthy sort of resistance in all of us to have a digital identity. We don't know, there's the questions around privacy, etc. But it is very important, and the initial onboarding is important, like you say, because everything after that relies on that very first digital identity that was created at my bank or at the e-commerce platform that I like to use. So after that, there's the authentication. There might be re-verification necessary, rebinding. There's all sorts of use cases that rely on that very first core identity, and that's the role that Mitek plays.
yeah. There's some interesting sort of comments on the over on LinkedIn. Charles Lang comment here. I mean, there's been lots of conversations around blockchain in the identity space. I mean, particularly around the using distributed ledger as a way to give access and revoke access. Given obviously the immutability of the records that are actually built into the chain, then actually it would be a potentially, I think, in theory, a pretty good source of structure around how identity could work. Is this something that you've spent much time looking at?
Yeah, I'm not a specialist on blockchain, just to be careful here. Our company has looked at that. We're looking at it in the product department, but I think ultimately you're right. So something that will remove sort of the personal data and then make it retractable from the system, and make me empowered to only share what I want to share, is exactly where we need to go. I'm not sure blockchain is the right technology, but it's definitely something that is a very interesting development.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I think, Charles, I'd say it from a POC perspective on very, very low numbers, sure. But actually, I think with everything that we're sort of seeing now within the DLT space, it's scalability that unfortunately is the problem. So
Yeah.
I think it is a great idea, but I don't think it will scale in the way that we need it to create either national or or international identity schemes at this stage. Peter Smith was saying, so the FCA are creating a digital sandbox alongside the regulatory one. Digital ID should be one of those first things incorporating the open standards industry project already running. I mean, again, it feels like the type of thing that we know the FCA have said they're sort of looking at these things. I mean, the more that central regulatory bodies drive the agenda on this, Joe, and particularly with the FCA's openness to work with not just large, giant incumbent banks, but actually people who are really on the edge of delivering innovations in this space. That sounds like a pretty positive sign for the industry.
It is. The only sort of caveat I put in there is I'm not sure we should be doing this at country level. Does that make sense? At national level, ultimately, I want to be able to use this digital identity anywhere around the world, because I might want to buy my shoes from America, but I need to issue my taxes here in Holland. So I think yes, and I think the UK is doing really well with the sandbox. Really sort of experimenting, trying to find out what the technology is. And what we also need to realize, I mean, probably I need to realize, is I've been in this space for such a long time, but it's still early days. It's strange, really, that we're still trying to find our way through this. And things like this pandemic has sort of fast forward us into, and it's squeezing us into a position where we need to now find out how we can solve this problem, really.
Yeah, it is an interesting one, isn't it? When you start looking at a global scale, your sort of mind wanders to the ones that already exist, and obviously passports are a thing, and there's quite a lot of information there, and actually, they have progressed over the last 10 years with having the ability to have the an RFID chip there to translate that information. But I guess to your point, actually, there is an agreed standard of information already there from a global network perspective. And I think the interesting thing with identity is always the thing that the identity is initially created for becomes a proxy for identity verification in almost all walks of life. I mean, using your driver's license to prove how old you are to buy some beers at like a 7-Eleven type thing, or using your passport to prove something to your employer. Your passport was not created to prove something to your employer. It was created for international travel. But I think that's where actually it becomes the portability of identity is really, really important. A comment from David Kolb here. So do you see the accelerated deployment of zero knowledge proofs? Do you think that will be something that actually will advance the ability to do this today?
Yeah, I'm not sure what he means by zero knowledge proof. I think if that's taking out the personal identifiable information from the transaction. In your example, if I can just prove I'm over 18 and buy the bottle of wine online, yes, that's the way forward. I don't see how we can do that right now because there's this juggle between governments, large companies, service providers to figure out who's going to do what. But looking further out, that's definitely where we should be going.
Yeah, I think it's to your point. It's actually being able to poll a central setup with purely the information that you require, rather than exposing everything. I mean, the example
we need to sort of go down to verified credentials. So proving either that I'm just 18, or if I need a mortgage, obviously I'm happy to share much more information and put out there. Just sharing my passport in every instance is a little bit at risk. Although companies like Mitek have come to a point now that we can do that very well and very safely and share that information. Ultimately, I think we should get to a point where we can choose what we share for the use case at hand, or for the interaction or authorization level that we need.
Yeah, I mean, it is, to your point, it's at this stage with identity. I mean, for anybody who doesn't know, sort of watching this, it turns into an all or nothing. You hand over your passport, they take a scan of your passport, they have all of that information about you, and they're storing it on a very, very secure bit of paper, right? So the idea that actually you give them everything or you give them nothing is like a massive hole in this element, because once they have that information, what is done with it, how it is stored, all of those things are to a certain degree kind of out of your understanding and out of your remit. Obviously, if you can then have a digital record of that thing where you only expose the answer to a query. So is Joe over 18? Yes, he is. Then actually, that's all they need to know. They don't need to know your exact age. They just need to know that you're over 18.
Right.
So I think there are lots and lots of different models that actually could happen here. I mean, there's a question here from Dan who says, do you think telcos have a role to play in this? Because obviously, as mobile has become more and more prevalent, and actually identity could and should really be something that we are carrying around with us all the time, then I mean, I'm never more than about 7 centimeters away from my mobile phone. So it seems like a pretty good candidate for where my identity should be.
Yeah, looking at it from both sides, I think the answer is yes. Looking at it from the consumer, like you say, we've got our mobile, I've got it right here sitting next to me now. It's also a pretty safe way of carrying information. The chip that you just mentioned that's now in the passport, that could easily later on be in my phone, and then I can use it from there. But look at it from the relying party side, the people who need to know that I am who I am. Yes, there's more information. We don't have to just rely on paper-based governmental issued documents. There's all sorts of other data sources that could be plugged in and can be used as trust signals, as we call them. So finding out if I'm really who I am.
Yeah, I think on that one, Dan, I'd say, I mean, either the mobile network operators or the handset manufacturers in themselves, if I'm honest with you, I think, both have the ability within the silicon that they've got to actually have secure enclaves within those setups. So, if a mobile network operator could provide a secure enclave within the SIM cards, then actually identity could sit there. If I'm honest with you, I think it's more likely, though, it will be the software, the operating system providers that actually will be closest to providing that type of service. But then obviously we start getting into a bit of a bifurcated setup. Google have one standard, Apple have one standard. This works with Android, this works with iOS, which obviously isn't helpful for everybody. You don't want two queues at the airport, or actually people who have a non-smartphone being penalized for going through a different line. There's all sorts of weird exclusion that'll kind of happen with that, and it potentially could become a little bit elitist. I mean, you've got to stand in the line and update your version of iOS before you're allowed to kind of go through the border control type thing. It's a difficult one, but I personally, I can definitely see this moving to a handset piece, and not just from a global perspective, but to provide identity to verify their customers when they're going into the branch, because at this stage, the security that most organizations put on their mobile banking, whether it's secure device registration, and then you're using Face ID or Touch ID or a password and a PIN. And by that point, if I can open up my mobile and verify I'm me to my Lloyd's, HSBC, Barclays app, that should verify me in the branch straight away, right?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, there's some other things that spring to mind, Dave. So there's also the trust side of it. Who will you and I trust with my identity? Who's going to be my identity carrier, if you will? Will that be the manufacturer of my phone? Will it be the mobile carrier? Will it be the bank? That's very, very true. So I can also see a play for the banks where they would not just be safeguarding for my money, but they could be an identity provider as well. And they could even have identity only clients. Why not?
Yeah. A comment here from Jane G. FCA not so interested in RegTech, which by nature helps companies. Their main mandate is to help consumers. I'm not sure I'd agree with that, Jane. I think very often, and actually I know Anna Wallace from the FCA has been watching this a lot lately. So Anna, feel free to answer that in the comments if you'd like to. But actually, I think from my perspective, a lot of what they do, even with technology providers, Joe, I'm sure you've had various different conversations with the FCA or various other people in this, whether it's the PRA or the Bank of England or whoever. But actually, they'll often bring together the old and the new, the people who are developing it in the way that they've done before, the new players who are pushing the boundaries on these things to try and push where that standard should be for these things. So while the mandate very much is to help consumers, progressing this type of thing, whether it's KYC or KYB, very much is on their agenda in terms of the things that move the industry forward, which ultimately is what benefits the end consumers.
Yeah, so just to chime in there, Dave, quickly, I think that's very true. We have been in front of regulators, and they're interested in new technology, also because they know the market's moving quickly and moving quickly than they can. So they know that they need to be ready with directive or standards to safeguard. That is the way that they can protect the consumers, by understanding what we are doing and other providers are doing.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I mean, there's a comment here from Richard Spink who says telcos are like traditional banks, far too cumbersome and technically to scale this stuff. And actually, I mean, it's an interesting one if you sort of think of that in the context of the banks right now. The reason many banks new onboarding, new application processes look like they do, exactly to your point, Joe, it's a digitized manifestation of the process that they used to go through, where stamps were applied to paper and you visited a branch 10 times. And this is really, I mean, in this particular crisis where we are, this is really hurting people because, you know, when a Monzo or a Revolut or whoever can do digital identity verification, they can do KYC or KYB, and all this stuff can happen in, you know, 3 to 7 minutes and get customers to solving the problem that they have, which in that first instance is just getting an account. I mean, we've worked with a few organizations on this. I know, Jason, you're watching this right now, but I know a lot of people have attempted this. And the interesting thing, when you start showing people what this can do, you know, your first engagement with an organization, if it's a horrific one trying to get in an account, and I won't say who our bank account was with from 11FS's perspective, but it was horrendous. And it involved me having to get in touch with the person who runs the department at the bank to get it unlocked, because the process was just so paper-based and it was just so arduous. In today's day and age, and actually in today's pandemic, people just can't afford to hang around for this problem to be solved 3 weeks later, can they?
No. So I remember you talking to the CEO of Starling Bank, is her name Anne, and it's a competitive advantage to them for a long time, has been that they could onboard somebody within minutes. That's a whole world in itself, by the way, Dave. So this whole expectation around fully automated verification, friction in this sort of process compared to going into a branch. We could fill a full show just talking about that, but it's so true that the new banks are now going to have to find out how to fix that problem, and that will bring them fast forward to a world where they can onboard clients within 2, 3, 4 minutes easily as well. We do projects like that all the time.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think, as we say, digital, you know, identity by nature is digital. You know, it has always been. It has always been since digital has existed, in terms of it being a stored set of information. And actually, really, I think the thing with branch is people need to realize that branch is just a distribution point for digital now. That's right. The services and everything there, and the industry has really sort of flipped at that point, because branch used to be just the distribution of the analog products that they have, and now it's just a touch point for digital systems. Like you say, Joe, we could talk about this for hours and hours. Unfortunately, we're just getting at the top of the hour, so we probably should wrap up at this stage, because everybody's probably got some work to go and do, unfortunately, even though it is Friday. All right, where can people learn a little bit more about you, Joe, and a little bit more about what you guys are up to at Mitek?
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, and obviously at our miteksystems.com website. There's a lot of information out there. So anybody wants to talk about digital identity verification, reach out to one of us. We're really happy to help.
Fantastic. That's all we have for you this week, not just this day. I'm aware of what day it is finally, and it's happened on a Friday. So have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe as much as you can. We'll see you on Monday, where I'm going to be joined by Benjamin Enser, who is the Director of Research at 11FS. We're going to be talking about all the research report we released yesterday. If you haven't checked that out, if you head over to info.11fs.com/COVID-19, It's basically what 11FS thinks is going to happen over the next 6 months. Some scary reading in there, but some pretty good advice on where we think this is going to have. Exactly as Joe says, for us, I think the excuse for not moving to digital and not that digitized world, as Joe says, but truly digital, is really sort of dissipating away. So check that out. Come prepared with your questions. Benjamin's a super smart guy, so he'll be ready and prepared for you. So if there's anybody else you want me to try and reach out to get onto the show, let me know. We've been reaching out to some really interesting guests, and there's lots of great people kind of in the line. But drop somebody in the comments if you think it is. If not, just send me an email at david@11fs.com. But have a great day, everybody. Stay safe. Have a great weekend. See you Monday.